So my talk today is on a project that is literally hot off the press that we just published this week. It was a lab project on insuring AI risks. And as did Steve, I have to acknowledge the cast of thousands working towards this project. So my first group of collaborators were from the Institute of Law and AI, a research institute in the US. That's Gabriel, Matteo, and Suzanne. Then we have our partners at the R&D lab and at IOE Japan, June, Ken, and Meg. And then last and certainly least, me, the humble engineer. And unfortunately for you, despite this project being all about law and insurance, you've just got me to speak to you today. So forgive me for my ignorance about some of the topics that I'll nonetheless be discussing. So to make a pitch for why we think insurance is critical to the future of AI, our first point is that insurance of AI models is important to get the most out of them across the economy and society, in the sense that many investments in AI are going to be bottlenecked by firms being unwilling to take on the risk that this uncertain new investment would entail. So this is particularly true for smaller firms who would be unable to self-insure against any of the harms that AI might cause. So if, alternatively, we have an insurance market that can help to mitigate against some of those harms, it may enable those smaller firms to take on the investment and thereby spread adoption of AI across the economy. Secondly, we think insurance is a key lever in promoting social benefits. So we know in sectors like auto insurance that the higher premiums you pay for risky driving behaviour serves as a lure to drive more safely. And we think when it comes to AI, insurance markets around AI could lead to an incentive, a direct financial incentive, to develop and deploy those AI models in the most responsible and safe way. And we think that's particularly true if the insurance is mandatory. And if the insurance is mandatory, we also have this sort of floor of financial protection for any of the potentially innocent victims of those AI harms. So this topic is vast, AI risks, even insurable AI risks. So our first job was to try and pin things down a little bit more precisely. So we tried to think about who might take out insurance policies against AI. So here was our four-part typology. At the top, we've got AI developers who might potentially be interested in professional indemnity insurance or something like that. At the bottom, we've got completely separate third parties, but even they might want to take out insurance products in the form of, say, unemployment insurance, if they're really worried about the employment impacts of automation through AI. And then thinking about what those insurance policies might protect against. Clearly, when it comes to AI risks, there are many, but we could categorize them in three different groups. Firstly, we have capabilities failures, where the AI simply doesn't do as well as you might hope, leading to potential downstream impacts on your bottom line. We also have the much discussed alignment failures, where the AI is doing a great job at the wrong thing, and that could be potentially very harmful. And then, and certainly not least, we have misuse, where AI models might be being used by malicious third parties and used to do things that they were never designed to do. And the sort of costs we were considering here could be divided between tangible and intangible. Tangible are the physical harms that might be caused by an AI model, even direct injuries to humans. Intangible costs would include things like data losses or reputation damage. And on that final point, you might be wondering why I've got a picture on the slide generated by DALL-E of fried chicken. Well, it was to serve as a reminder to myself to talk about one particular case of AI-caused reputational damage from a couple of years ago in Germany. I'm not sure if anyone's heard about this story. But 2 years ago in Germany, KFC was doing a trial of using an algorithm to recommend its marketing messages linked to certain events of interest, like public holidays. And on Kristallnacht in 2022, KFC promoted a message across all its social media channels saying, "Let's help to celebrate Kristallnacht," which was, of course, the event that is widely believed to have kicked off the Holocaust. "Let's celebrate Kristallnacht. Get some more tender cheese for your crispy chicken today," which, as you might understand, didn't go down particularly well in Germany. And it's sort of testament to the ways in which you do actually have to have some sort of safeguards against what these AI models might do on your behalf. But against that dizzying range of potential things to consider, given that this was a lab project of finite duration, we decided to focus on 3 domains in particular. Firstly, perhaps unsurprisingly, autonomous vehicles, but we also considered AI agents and cybersecurity, where I've had Steve preparing the ground for the talk very nicely earlier. So considering AVs first, let's think about the present day of automotive insurance and automotive risks. So it's probably obvious that automotive risks are very serious, and vehicle accidents are estimated to cause about 1.19 million fatalities every year. So clearly something against which insurance is very necessary. And in many countries, that kind of liability insurance is focused directly on driver negligence. So the insurance is to protect you against driving slightly inaptly, leading to such an accident. And in many jurisdictions, that insurance is indeed mandatory. So I've described those points really to provide a contrast against the future we might be heading towards with autonomous vehicles, which might not be too far away. So many pundits are saying that those level 5 autonomous vehicles might be on our streets as early as 2035. I've put a couple of question marks because, of course, we've seen over-optimistic forecasts for the deployment of autonomous vehicles very commonly in the past. Nissan and Tesla have been prime culprits, but you wouldn't rule it out at least that these vehicles might be just around the corner, particularly given the trials that Waymo is doing in San Francisco, where you can indeed just get into a self-driving taxi to zip you around the city. But when we think about how those vehicles might tie into insurance markets, the first and perhaps most obvious point is that the vehicles themselves are taking on a much larger fraction of the responsibility for the behaviour of the vehicle. That is, there's not really a driver in an autonomous vehicle at which you can point and blame for any accidents. So the obvious direction of travel, if autonomous vehicles become more prevalent, is away from driver negligence and more towards product liability. So that would mean, writ large, that probably you'll no longer, as an individual driver, need to have insurance yourself, but maybe the manufacturer does, because the manufacturer is going to be on the hook for any product liability cases. However, there are other things going on here as well, because it's likely that a future with a majority of the vehicles on the street being autonomous is likely to be safer than at present. Probably these vehicles are suffering fewer accidents than drivers today who might be distracted by kids screaming in the back seat or whatever. And in that case, if there are fewer accidents, maybe the manufacturers don't even need insurance, because maybe they're big enough to sort of self-insure, to just wear the losses if one of these product liability cases comes along. So all of that means that, it does seem quite likely there's going to be a big disruption of the auto insurance market. It's not just that there'll be new policies for autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles might mean the end of auto insurance altogether. Moving ahead to our next sector, AI agents, which are of course much discussed today, which are bits of software that you can use to execute these complex multi-step workflows, perhaps to navigate the entire process of a sale. And while they're still quite nascent, it is obvious that they have enormously broad potential deployments. There are many places that we might be able to use, even relatively near-term large language model-driven agents. So this development, where more and more labour is handed over to these AI agents, will again have quite profound implications for insurance. The first thing that we'll need are new legal liability frameworks. We'll need to come up with laws that can assign blame for anything that these AI agents might do wrong. And when it comes to insuring against those errors, the harms that they might cause, the problem is that these AI agents are likely to lead to enormously high variance risk profiles. That is, in some places they'll do very little wrong, and even where they do go wrong, the harms are not so significant, and much of the social media space in which AI is deployed today is of that type. If a photo is mistagged or slightly the wrong post is promoted up your feed, it's not the end of the world. But as these agents are put out into the breadth of society, perhaps used in higher stakes applications, there could be some catastrophic risks that might entail. And it's going to be interesting to see how insurance markets can disambiguate between those different use cases so that insurance products can actually be provided. And then our third and final deep dive, as we called it, was on cybersecurity, again with Steve having done much of the necessary groundwork here. So I'm sure it's obvious to us all that cybersecurity is an immensely important topic for most businesses across the world today. The current cybersecurity insurance market is about 14 billion US and is expected to over double to 29 billion in just a matter of a few years. The quote here from security professional Dmitry Alperovich in the US is fairly apt, I think. It's a quote that's been backed up by many other security professionals. And if you think that there are firms that would be too smart to be caught out by the cybersecurity attacks, I'd like to remind you that last year OpenAI itself had to admit to being targeted and indeed suffering from a cybersecurity incident. So no one seems immune. And cybersecurity has many links to the direction of travel in AI. So the first impact of AI on cyber risks is that AI will likely exacerbate those risks. So with AI, you can probably craft more sophisticated attacks. You can probably detect vulnerabilities in a more robust, wide-ranging way than has been true in the past. And the attacks that you develop on the back of those vulnerabilities can be more personalised because you can automate more of the work than has been possible in the past. Those attacks are also likely to become cheaper as a result, probably faster. You know, the 0 days will be uncovered more quickly. And also, unfortunately, the fact that many of these AI models today are open source means that it's going to be difficult to stop them falling into the hands of malicious actors and to have actors that might not historically have had the technical know-how to launch some of these advanced cyber attacks. Those actors might be able to use the open source large language models to target, high stakes applications that would previously have been out of their reach. But then simultaneously, AI itself is vulnerable to cyber attacks, as Steve had mentioned earlier. So as we all know, these cutting edge foundation models are immensely expensive to train. And of course, as a result, there's a direct financial incentive for other actors to try and steal them. But even if you can't steal the entire model, all its weights and training data, it's still valuable to just try and take some of its data, or even if the model remains in place, to perturb it in some way, to disrupt it, that can lead to it doing harm in a way that benefits you. So you might have heard of these poisoning attacks, where you disrupt the data sets on which these models are trained, and there are results that show that even if you perturb only 0.001% of a model's training set, you can get it to flip its behaviour and become truly harmful. So, with those deep dives out of the way, we started thinking about what we could actually do legally to help tackle some of these emerging harms and how insurance might build on the back of those changes. So as I said, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, the direction of travel seems fairly clear. We'll be moving away from individual drivers to thinking more about product liability and manufacturers as the cause of problems. And it could be that actually regulators start to ease standards on the roads, which are currently quite high, if the vehicles, the autonomous vehicles, prove to be substantively safer than human drivers today. Perhaps it's not such a concern that we have so many laws governing how they operate. When it comes to these emerging areas of AI agents and cyber risks, a lot of change is going to have to happen in the legal sphere. So in our report, we stepped through some different frameworks we think that might be applicable. The first of which is strict liability, which is, as its name suggests, a very sort of powerful lever. It's the framework that's used to govern explosives today. So if you're an explosives manufacturer, you are liable for any damage from your explosives, even if you as a manufacturer did everything right. So you are strictly liable even if you did everything you could have done to prevent accidents if an accident does occur. So that's a very high bar, and it may be that in some spaces, when it comes to, for instance, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, we might want to put that bar in place to ensure that there are really strong incentives for responsible deployment of AI systems. We also, as I discussed earlier, have been thinking about mandatory insurance. Perhaps AI developers should have mandatory professional indemnity insurance. Perhaps AI firms will have to have mandatory insurance. We think all of that could be a great incentive for safer behaviour. Another really interesting topic is that of punitive damages. So the challenge for insurance is that there are some risks, some harms, that are just too big to insure. And the classic examples are things like war or acts of terrorism, where the damage that can be done is just too big for any individual insurer to take on, and as a result, insurance markets just can't operate. So while insurance can't directly help with those truly catastrophic risks, maybe the failure of an entire country's energy infrastructure, what insurance could do is tag team with new laws that give penalties to companies for near misses. And this is what punitive damages are. So this is a legal framework in which courts can assign penalties not for the actual harm that was generated, but instead for what could have happened, what was plausible given the set of mistakes that the company might have made. And then finally, particularly when it comes to AI agents, we think we're going to have to look to vicarious liability, whereby the AI firm can be held responsible for the actions of its agents, in the way today that a company can be held responsible for the actions of its employees, or as a parent, you can be held responsible for the actions of your children or your pet. So how is all this going to play out? Well, we think it's very uncertain, of course. We don't know how quickly different legislatures will get onto these topics. And while there might be some quick acceleration via new laws, the EU seems to be pushing ahead fairly rapidly, we think it's more likely that we'll just see sort of a gradual evolution through the courts as courts consider these issues on a case-by-case basis. And as a result, there is a potential for different jurisdictions to diverge. Different conclusions will be reached given the different cases that are considered. So what does all that mean for insurance firms? Well, firstly, I think there's an urgent priority for insurers to develop AI risk assessment methods, new quantitative means of assessing risk. And of course, our partners at IOE are very keen to do exactly that. There's also a need to create specialised AI insurance products. And again, our partners at IOE are doing exactly that and have sold an AI agent policy in Japan which will protect its client against failures of the AI model that lead to defamatory speech or infringements of IP, for instance. So I think that's great. Another thing that insurers are going to have to think very seriously about is silent AI exposure. So what I mean by silent AI exposure is coverage through existing policies of new harms that AI might create. And this is a realistic possibility in the world of cyber. So there are many cyber policies that are sold today that very likely could cover new AI harms that will be unlocked. So things like data loss, for instance, that AI might accelerate, might be covered by existing cyber policies. So insurers will have to think very carefully about the ways in which their existing policies might be covering more than they had actually intended. And then finally, as I mentioned before, when it comes to autonomous vehicles and more broadly, we do need to think through this question of liability. Who is going to be held responsible in the event of something going wrong with AI? So thanks for your attention. Just to sum up, certainly we think insurance is crucial to the future of safe AI adoption, doing AI right, as we want to do at Foundry. Insurers, however, are likely to face a rocky road with some traditional markets disrupted, particularly auto, and the need to race after these quickly emerging markets in agents and cybersecurity. To make those changes possible, the regulators need to get on board. We need new legal frameworks, particularly on liability, to tackle these issues. And finally, with all of that in hand, the future of AI safety might actually hinge more on the actuary spreadsheet than on the developer's code. And yes, if you're wondering, that final line was written by a large language model. So thanks very much for your attention and very happy to take questions.